Hello and welcome to my reading from the book of Limericks. I start now. The introduction. The Limerick, like much of what it celebrates, can easily become addictive. Each one takes seconds to read. You may be drawn, like many before you, to read just one more, until dipping moves to browsing and whole pages are consumed in one go. This vast collection of limericks, containing those which have been written, sung and spoken over a period of nearly 200 years, shows how they reflect with undiminished accuracy the humor, neuroses, and obsessions of our times, and it's easy to see how the metre and rhyming scheme appeal to the poet in all of us. Generally, their readability has something of the endearing quality of nursery rhymes. Everyone's heard of them. Everyone can recite them. 1. Indeed, Hickory Dickory Dock is an example of both. Specifically, the license to address every subject under the sun, but most especially relations between the sexes, gives many of them an exotificate boost. This is a poetic form with a kick in it. Recognized old favorites get rewarded to fit a person or a place, yet the acts described or the issues confronted can remain strangely familiar. New limericks invigorate the old form by such updatings, and the repertoire widens to accommodate the feelings of each new age. What could only privately be circulated to innocent for mainstream test springs out perhaps 10 years later into public view as moods and perception change. The famous Lachman, writing the preface to his 2 collections, duly refers to the blurring of sexual differences in 1964, newly christened unisex, wondering if, with the colorless and unviral people multiplying like skinned rabbits all around us, the limerick may fall dead or disappear tomorrow. It didn't. 30 or more so years later it has, if anything, diversified and multiplied, for the limerick has international and eternal appeal. The true nature of the beast, occasionally peering out from under the demure garments with which the mainly anonymous writers have sought to render themselves respectable, is untamable. It defies limits of propriety, and it reminds us that civilized societies must dig deep to eradicate the violence of prejudice. The limerick is essentially a story in 5 lines of verse. There are usually 9 beats in line 1, 2 and 5, 6 beats in lines 3 and 4, the 9th beats in lines 1, 2 and 5 are accentuated, and this is called anapestic rhythm of food. 2 short syllables and a long. The first line sets the scene and gives us the main character. Edward Lear's "There was an old man in a tree" is a perfect example. The second line rhymes with the first, "who was horribly stung by a bee." The third and fourth line are shorter. They rhyme with each other. When they said, "Does it buzz?" he replied, "Yes, it does." The fifth line rhymes with the first 2 and produces the climax. It's a regular brood of a bee. It is most effective when the climax is unexpected, and Lear's limericks differ from later efforts, and it's quite often his 5th line mirrors his first. What William Baring Good in The Lure of the Limerick calls the sudden swoop, the twist that makes you smile, is simply absurd, and you may find them weak or oddly satisfying depending on your taste. Lear's fantastical verbal adventures into nonsense were more critically acclaimed the second time around, but both his books mirror the response to life it seems he always had. He described the experience of going to the city to bank the 125 £125 that he earned for the book of nonsense absurdly so unusual for an artist, normally one of society's poorer citizens, that must explain why the whole way from Temple Bar to the bank was crowded with carriage and people. So immense a sensation did this occurrence make. All the way back it was the same, which was very gratifying. His kindly, zippy, zany, humorous word inventions thrilled the children of the 8060s and 8070s. Most copies have disappeared, dog-eared with loving use, and reprints have continuously appeared. Lear's gentle books of nonsense, 1846 and then 1862, are often considered to contain the first limericks. In fact, two important collections were published before that, Buff and Newmas and Buff known to Lear. The history of 16 wonderful old women and anecdotes of 15 gentlemen were published in 1821 and 1822 by John Marshall of London. One of the wonderful old woman was called Towel. She went to sea with an owl, and she gave Lear the idea for his much loved The Owl and the Pussycat. Robert Cruikshank's illustration pleasing him. The limerick particularly said to have inspired Lear to write his own was now famous. There was a sick man of Tobago, lived long on rice curel and sago, but at last to his bliss the physician said this, to a roast leg of mutton you may go. Far from having claimed to have invented the limerick, or even from using it as a term, he wrote that he discovered in it a form of verse lending itself to limitless varieties for rhymes and pictures, and thenceforth the great part of the original drawings and verses for the first book of nonsense was struck off. The word limerick officially entered our language in 1898, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, when it was defined as understand nonsense verse. Whether it originated in the drinking songs of Limerick, a town on the banks of the River Shannon in Ireland, it is not known. But it's far from the 19th century phenomenon. We can go back to some very early examples. Summer is Icumen Inn, about Soreen, which contains this verse: Ewe pluthed after lamp, loaf after calf coo, bullock starthes, puke farthes, merry sing cuckoo. And later are others such as this, attributed to Elizabeth I, 1533 till 1603. The daughter of debate, who discorded I doth so, half reaped no gain, but for by rain, half tall still peace to grow. The very beautiful verse by Herrick, 1591 till 1674, is a reminder of how recently lyrical these 5 lines could be. Her eyes aglow warm lend thee, the shooting stars attend thee, the elves also, whose little eyes glow, like sparkle of fire befriend thee. And this lyricism is echoed more than a century later in Leigh-Hunt's lovely lines in his song to Ceres. Laugh out in a loose green chukin, that's fit for a goddess to work in, with shoulders brown the weather to ground, about felt samples perking. There's an even earlier find. 2 researchers, Robert Swan and Frank Sidgwick, found this in the British Museum Harlane manuscript of 1322. It is recorded in their book The Making of Words, 1934. The line is wonderly strong, and full of wiles of who, and whether it blew, other takes brew, you cannot do but so slay. You can range over the centuries to discover verse with sufficiently moves towards the metre and style of limericks to deserve comparison with what we recognize as limericks today, and various scholars will point to such moments in history as the emergence of the mad songs after the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII, when wandering beggars sang for their living. Lachlan cites Tom O'Battle as the greatest of them, first recorded in Giles Earl's manuscript music book of about 1615. Tough may be decades old by then, he says, and in Limerick meters route to a tune as haunting as the words. From the hack and hungry goblin that into rags would rend here, and the spirit that stands by the neck man in the book Moon's defend here. Satire and the erotic themes in many drinking songs of the 17th and 18th centuries give a glimpse of the Limerick's early potential, but with all its comings and goings, it was the 19th century that saw the Limerick finally established in the celebrated form that you can see in this book. With Lear and his two enormous predecessors of American books such as Inklings for Thinklings, in 1865, one of 3 volumes of Limericks sales proceeds going to injured soldiers of the Civil War, with university students in Duns, especially as Oxford and Cambridge, and with many clergymen all contributing their wit, named anonymously. It settled into stay. The poets Swinburne and Rossetti and friends parodied the innocence of Lear's nonsense verse. Limericks concealed in prose appeared insidiously in George newspapers, and despite much prevalent ideas about the best needing to be kept to oral tradition, both the gentle and the ones with a bite, the witty and the ingenious were ineluctable and irrepressible joined out. In the early 20th century, newspapers and periodicals punch-led the way, set up competitions in which prizes were offered for the best, most pungent last line, and how the Limerick cleaned up its act, turned briefly into nonsense verse, and leapt right back again, is due to the influence of all these different people, making it possible for children and the ordinary reading public to read verse in the same form as readers of a more private kind, all conforming to the same standards of meter and rhyme. And wit? You might say that the Limerick went underground, having a rich life in pamphlets and magazines with a limited circulation. Maurice Bishop's much-quoted Limerick suggests that, without Low's quarantine, it promptly becomes disorderly, drunk, and obscene. It naturally degenerated. Louis Untermeyer says, the Limerick absorbed solemnities and absurdities, traditional legends and off-color jokes, devoid reflections and downright indecence, without a queer or loss of syllable. It refused to recognize borderlines or any other limits. The obscenities of such collections as those in the Cromer magazine of 1882 showed the contributors' relish in scatological sexual aggression and perversion. As I read the real edition of this magazine in the British Library, I became aware of the very particular origins for its verse. The serious story linking all 3 reveals the writer's preoccupations with sexual power and sadism as black slaves on plantation endured them, here presented as titillatory. The Limericks followed almost weekly on from such a world exposed in all its horror. The horrendous and far from unusual subject matter as its natural home here. The editor declares he will satisfy a long-felt want, often expressed to subtly material which the votaries of Venus deserve. The devotees of the little blind god who has no preachers on. Since they are determined to get from life the acme of enjoyment, the maximum of pleasure with the minimum of pain, they should regard this magazine as especially devoted to their interests. Lachlan makes a case for what happens in societies that repress sexuality in the way that Britain did. For example, it responds to the dangers of the French Revolution. When moral wars are fought, they literally lead to the immediate creation of subterranean erotic folklore and literature. Joan Smith, in her book Misogynis, writing in 1989, more broadly tackles the thesis that there is a hidden passion that almost distorts human relations. Woman-hating, she suggests in her chapter titled Crawling from the Wreckage, as part of the necessary armor of the male bomber pilot, and soldier, sailor said, and soldier, sailor, and ergo most other men, who defends his country, needing to reform his masculine identity, he must separate himself from woman and prize his absence of feeling. When men are suddenly caught unawares, whether by love or just or pity or rage, they have no experience to guide them. And having built up their defenses, they cannot cope with the intense urges or desires which may lead to relaxed happiness, and which may become a threat to their carefully constructed masculine existence. They enshrine this position in their vocabulary and in the songs of barrack room and bar. Society accepts and gives support to this. Its literature addresses this tension. Some literary forms will debate it and others embrace it. The Limerick effortlessly does the latter. Following the general beginnings of Lear's wildly nonsensical verse, you will thus find place the obscene and the indecent. Some people think that to work properly, the limerick must be sexist or racist. It must be offensive in some way for the fifth line to impact. The canon cannot be broadly represented without its sexual side. Works such as Cypher's Hymn or Flags from the Forest Can and The Pearl, a monthly journal of FaceTime and voluptuous reading, by seminal sick. But I found it painless to discard those limericks which were pertinent to race where ethnicity took over from her geography. And the best limerick of all? Langford Reid wrote to dozens of his correspondents in 1925, asking them to name the joys. He arrived at the conclusion that this was the most popular. There was a young lady of Riga, who smiled as she rode on a tiger. They returned from the ride, with the lady inside, and a smile on the face of the tiger. Or, if you are a classical scholar, puella originis right bed, cum dictoris intergo seatbed, externo perfecta, interno reacta, sed rises cum dictorum manibet. Of course, it may not be your favorite limerick. Indeed, you may fail to find your favorite in this anthology. This may be because of copyright or libel considerations, but if you feel that there are serious omissions, please write to me, C.O. Wordsworth Editions Limited, 8 B Street, where Hertfordshire, SG 129HJ, and I will consider them for inclusion in any reprints. Finally, I wish to acknowledge the help and suggestions given to me by Brother Christian, Philip Stewart, and Conor McHugh. Without them, this collection would never have been complete. Linda Marsh. Thank you for hearing. That was it with the introduction. Goodbye.